Carl Zha, host of Silk and Steel, whom you can find on Twitter at Carl Zha. That's with a C, CarlZha or ZHA, or on YouTube, also at Carl Zha, has been hopping around the world, all over the place, really. We thought it would be a great time to get his insights on what's going on in Sino-US relations. Unless I missed something, Carl is in Indonesia, right?
I am back. Yes, I'm
You
back
are
to
back in
Bali after brief brief journey back into United States. I came back already.
So not only did you go to the United States, but you were actually in the US and then you came to Beijing for what, 2 days, 3 days?
Yes, I did. So it wasn't planned because I originally my plan was just go back for a family trip because my parents haven't seen their grandson or my wife
Ah.
for 4.5 years. I was in Indonesia, so I thought it was a good time to spend some time with my family. And then I got a call from RT that said, "Hey, we have this opportunity for you to co-host the RT coverage of the Belt and Road Forum in Beijing. Would you like to come?" I'm like, "Hell yes!" And I thought I was going to be in Beijing, like talking to Putin. But it turns out RT actually built their studio on the actual Great Wall of China,
Wow.
like two and
Wow.
a half hours north of Beijing. It's not even in the Beijing city. It's in the Luanping, Hebei province. So from the airport, I had to drive about 2 hour and a half. There's nothing there. There's nothing except for the Great Wall and the hotel. Like to buy socks, I need to beg for the hotel staff to drive 35 kilometers into the town to buy me socks. So
Wow.
yeah, that's how remote it was. It
Well, I
was
mean, as cool as it would have been to be like, meet Putin, obviously, like doing a live broadcast from the Great Wall, that's pretty cool.
it's pretty cool. It's
Yeah.
pretty damn. Yeah.
I mean, I live next to the Great Wall. I've never done that. Now I'm really jealous. So
Well,
you
I
go ahead.
recommend that section of the Great Wall. Don't go to the Badalin where all the tourists go. Go to Jinsan. I think it's called Jinsanlin.
Gene
Jinsanlin.
Sanley.
Yeah, because it's 2.5 hours outside of
Yeah.
Beijing. Nobody goes there. Nobody goes there. So you have
Is
the
this
all. Yeah, go
is
ahead.
it near Gubei Watertown, that area?
Yes, it's pretty close. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I've been to
I mean,
that part.
it's still probably like an hour or like 45 minutes away from Gubei, but it's pretty remote. But I highly recommend it because you got all the section of the wall unrestored, like in the wild Great Wall to
Oh,
yourself.
wow. That is
Yeah.
pretty cool. Yeah. Yeah, I saw some pictures of you scaling the Great Wall, and it looked pretty intense. That looked a lot like the Simitai area, which is Gubei, area also. So I guess that whole area is just like peaks and valleys. It looked intense. So you went to Russia, and it just so happens that when you arrived there, what happened?
Oh, it's not planned. It just so happened
Sure.
I woke up one day, my phone was going off the hook, and everybody asked me if I was okay. And it turns out the Prigozhin launched his quote unquote coup, and
Wow.
I was in Moscow. The Prigozhin's troop never made it into Moscow. They
Yeah.
were like 3.5 hours away before everything was called off. So
Hmm.
I went to an evening concert, and then after the concert was over, I was told by my tour guide everything is over. So I had a interesting day. Yes.
So I find it really interesting because when you were in the States, like, and you flew to China, you had as you mentioned at the beginning of the show, you brought your family with you to the States, and then you basically were just, how did the kids react to Daddy's leaving to China right now as soon as we get to the United States?
Well, I cannot thank my wife enough for putting up with me just taking off a week to go to China and back. But my kid, he has enough things to distract him from, American fast food.
Yeah.
He likes KFC. He likes KFC fried chicken.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's yeah. I mean, KFC is everywhere now. I feel like they're taking over the world. It used to be McDonald's, now it feels like KFC. KFC, watch out, McDonald's. Okay, so I have a question because you live in Indonesia and that's home, I guess, but you were in the United States and you are a U.S. citizen. So, uh, where is home? Did it feel like you were going home, or did it feel like you were going like somewhere else? What was it like returning to the United States as a U.S. citizen who lives in Indonesia?
Well, so I was actually visiting my parents' house in North Carolina. They moved to North Carolina after I went to college, so I actually didn't spend significant time there. I was in North Carolina maybe for a year, and what struck me is how little has changed, like physically, visually. You know,
Mm.
like it looks the same as if when I first went to visit my parents in like 2003, you know, like 20 years ago, right?
Wow.
Okay, there's more houses now. Like when my parents first moved in, they were like they were like the number 8 house in their subdivision. Now there's more houses, but you know, it's just added more malls. But other than that, it's not really much has changed. Like I can still navigate, you know, like I can navigate pure by memory. So that's how
Wow.
little, yeah.
Well, you mentioned they're adding more malls because that's one thing I noticed in China too. You know, I came here 2011 or 2012, and there were a few giant super malls here in Beijing, but now there's like I don't know 50 malls in Beijing. Is that same process happening in the United States where they're just adding malls everywhere?
I mean, there's more people coming into the area because you know, especially after COVID, people from like New York area, they realize, hey, you know, they can work from home, they can live anywhere. Why live in New York City? And so they're getting a lot of snowbirds coming down. But
Uh,
like I said, the visually it's not. It's oh, one thing that did surprise me is a sticker shock because I had to pay like an
mm,
$8 frozen banana at North Carolina Zoo for my child. $8 frozen banana. That's like you know, my child have to have it, so there's nothing I can do. But I asked my parents. They say, yeah, the price has gone up a lot in the last couple of years. You
wow.
know, which well, because I've been away for 4.5 years. I wasn't expected to drop like you know, $30 in a fast food restaurant. You
Wow.
know,
Yeah.
I took my family to Carl's Jr. at LAX. I took my kid, my junior, to Carl's Jr. And I was like, we just ordered like a couple combo meals, and it's like $30. The bills
Wow.
like I mean, like this fast food restaurant. I mean, it's that's a big shock to me, and I don't know how people back home put up with that.
You know, I have my own story about Carl's Jr. because I'm a big fan of, you know, I'm an American, so I love different kinds of fast food, and we have McDonald's and Burger King and like stuff like that here in China. But I was in Shanghai in the airport on my way back to Beijing a couple weeks ago, and I found a Carl's Jr.'s in the airport, and this is the first one I've seen in China, so I was like, okay, I have to go. But you know, it wasn't nearly as expensive as what you're describing, so I guess they have different price points for different countries. That's really interesting because you know we've seen the what is it 9% interest for a couple of years straight. Now it's down to like 3.4 CPI. So that's crazy that you're spending $30 for fast food for your family. Was that the primary thing that you noticed difference? That was reverse culture shock going back to the United States, sticker shock. How were your conversations with? Did you talk to people other than your own family, friends, people who lived in the area, and what was the feeling on the ground in the U.S. versus how it felt before? Is everything really like this very polarized situation, or like are people just like maybe it's blown out of proportion by the media, which blows everything out of proportion? What were conversations about the world like?
Well, you know, I talked to different people, like people like my parents' neighbor, right, who may or may not be overtly political, but I also talked to activists, peace activists.
Mm,
I talked to Ken Jones from Asheville, North Carolina, who's part of the Mass Peace Action. And you know, they actually took me to a pro-Palestinian rally in downtown Asheville. So what I feel is in US, most people live in kind of bubble. Like they live in the bubble where it's like work, home, and the shopping mall. They're like traveling between the point A to point B to point C, and you always like you are kind of in your own bubble. You're in your car, in your office space, in your home. One thing that really struck my wife, who came from Indonesia, is like, okay, it's like, wow, in Indonesia, you will see people everywhere, right? In United States, you see cars everywhere, but you don't see people.
Yeah, I guess that sounds
Unless you go
accurate.
to shopping malls, right? Unless you
yeah.
go to the shopping mall. So I think that's a big difference for her. But it does seem U.S. people are there's less feeling of community, like than say you're in Bali, because in Bali like they have a lot of religious holidays in Bali, so almost like every month I'd be required to go travel with my wife back to her home village to participate in the village.
Monthly.
Yeah. Like monthly, you go back to her village to celebrate the religious festival together with the village, right? So you have that kind of community.
That sounds awesome.
No, it's great. It's great. I mean, like in United States, if you're not part of a church or something, I don't know where like that there's less, I guess there's kind of less overt like that social bonding going on.
What did your kid? You mentioned they were having fun because of fast food and they love KFC. Well, what did your kid? Because your kids, how old are
Okay,
they?
first let me qualify. I'm talking
Sure.
about my kid. So my wife, according to my wife, also me, the American fast food in Indonesia is way better than American fast food in the
Really?
US. So the Carl's Jr. and Burger King and McDonald's. Well, actually, I don't know if they have Carl's Jr. in Indonesia, but Burger King and McDonald's taste way better in Asia, because they have like local flavors, they have different like even the texture, the chicken. Like one of my complaint of my wife is like, oh my God, this chicken doesn't taste like chicken. I have to explain to her in the United States, we raise the chicken from the egg to to burger to burger meat in like 7 weeks, like because like whereas in I mean they still do have industrialized chicken farming in Indonesia, but in many places like Bali, people still have like basically free ranging chicken. They grow chicken for like 6-7 months because they usually don't slaughter the chicken right away because they want to have eggs. And so yes, so the chicken actually tastes like chicken. I mean, yeah.
I gotta try. I gotta try this because I don't remember that going from America to China. I don't have a memory that chicken changed flavor, but now I have to go back and try this now for sure. But what did your kids think? Because you said it's been 4.5, 5 years since you went back to the States. For them, it's like an alien world, right? So what did they think about the United States? Were they thrilled to be there, or was it like weird for them?
My kid is 2.5, so I don't think it just oh, my daddy is taking me to a new place.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so let's see. Let's talk a little bit about politics. So let's start with Blinken's trip to China. Like, a lot has happened since then, but I think that's interesting. So Sino-US relations had been kind of frozen, cool. Things are warming up now. But Blinken came over to China initially to kind of start to warm things up after, I guess, Tim Cook and Elon Musk sort of got everything started. Was that a positive development? Was that a meaningful trip?
Well, I think China was sending a signal, right? The fact that it was inviting all those American CEOs, Elon Musk, Tim Cook, Bill Gates, etc., not for a while, not talking to Biden. They're saying, like, look, we are open for business. We are welcome, Western people to come to do business in China, but we don't like to be lectured. Like what Tony Blinken likes to do.
Yeah.
We don't want a repeat of that Alaska Anchorage meeting where both sides were just basically talking past each other. The American side did a lot of grandstanding basically for their own domestic audience. And then what's the point of meeting, right? And what's the point of meeting in Beijing? You can do that at home. And I think there was a 7 hour meeting. I think more than 7 hours meeting. It was 7 hour meeting with Blinken, just with former Chinese foreign minister, but it was a long, drag out process. I very much would like to be a fly on the wall in those situations to see what exactly they said in private. But we have seen, that was followed up with Lincoln was before Gina Raimondo, right? And
Yeah.
also,
Yeah.
also then there was Janet Yellen. Janet
Yeah.
Yellen. So there's like a series, and then you have Newsom, right? California governor.
Well, before we get to Newsom, can I ask you about
Yeah.
Yellen? Because Yellen went to China. She apparently had a good time. It looked like she was having a good time. She was on the tarmac when she landed in San Francisco, and she's announced that she's going back to China in 2024. So my feeling is the U.S. wants China to buy more treasuries. What do you think?
Well, I think that's most people's reading. I mean, what's Yellen's job? Yellen is a treasury secretary. Like, why is she always be at the present when during China meeting? Because Janet Yellen famously said U.S. can afford to front war, but the reality is no, U.S. can. It needs countries like China or Japan or some other foreign countries to invest in U.S. Treasury bills, and if that stopped, that result could be catastrophic for United States. This is the real reason Janet Yellen is going to China, is saying, "Hey, please buy our Treasury bills," but this is a series of meetings, I guess, that led to the Xi Biden summit in San Francisco. But I think,
which you were present for that also.
Yes, also by accident. I was actually, my sister that weekend invited me to visit their family, so it just so happens that I was in town, and
if you want something to happen in your country, just have Carl Zha over. It's gonna start off kick off right away.
So they did clean up San Francisco. I drove through San Francisco all the way to North Point, but what they did is they moved all the homeless population away from like all the important busily travel venues where all the APEC dignitary will visit, to like less visible part of the city. I mean, like it's not true they got rid of all homeless, because I saw homeless people. They're just like in the back street now. They're in the back street. They're not visible. But but the tone has definitely changed after Newsom's visit to China, because even during the Gina Raimondo and even Janet Yellen visit, the tone, it was still is not quite. You can't quite be described as warm. Maybe Janet Yellen had a great time because she had those mushrooms, but Gina Raimondo, she wasn't happy. Huawei released a new phone during her visit.
Well, she was kind of lecturing. She had the same kind of Anchorage style meeting feeling, like she was coming to China to be like, oh, America wants you to do this and America wants you to do that. So she kind of was still in that old sort of mentality. And it does feel like things have warmed up a little bit. In terms of Gavin Newsom, he was like spinning around in cars, and he seemed to actually really be having a good time and really trying to promote Sino-California subnational. This is the new term that's coming out all the time now. Subnational relations. And maybe California is looking to install an enormous amount of power charging stations so that they can start to develop their EV market in the United States, because it probably be one of the largest markets outside of China in the world. California is, the fifth largest economy if it was separate from the United States. Why was Newsom really here? Was he here because he wanted to promote Sino-US relations, or was he setting himself up for a future presidential run? What do you think?
Well, it could be both, Jason. I think really he was ultimately any U.S. politician does is to further their own their own political career, and that's
Right.
what
Yeah.
Newsom is doing. But it doesn't mean it couldn't be helpful. I think it was very helpful that he was promoting a quite different tone in his interaction with China. He took the high speed train, like God, I wish California has went with China on the high
Yeah.
speed rail. I still remember in 2008, I was living in LA. I was dating this Japanese woman who worked in the LA Japan consulate, and her job was taking all the Japanese businessmen to meet with California state people to discuss the high speed rail, to planning the
Mm.
high speed rail. That was 2008. And in 2008, that was also the year China started to build its own high speed rail. I mean, look at
Mm.
it today. The
Yeah.
difference couldn't be more stark. I mean, California built like a couple bridges right now for for the future high speed rail. So I mean the tone Kevin Newsom set during his visit, that was very hopeful, and that actually was, I think, set the tone for the Xi Biden summit in San Francisco. And I don't know what I definitely think there's a warming up, and like
Hmm. Hmm.
Winston Churchill said, "Jaw jaw is better than war." So I mean,
Mm.
the fact that they're meeting, the fact they're talking is better than them not talking. And I think also at this particular juncture, there's some decision makers in U.S. are also finally realizing the hard limit on the U.S. global empire, because
Hmm.
now Janet Yellen, to the contrary, U.S. cannot fight a two-front war, and much less a three-front war, like another confrontation in East Asia with China. So I drew the analogy to um, the the period around 2001. So in the early part of 2001, the China-U.S. tension was at all-time high. There was a Hainan spy plane incident when the U.S. spy plane was forced landed on the Chinese island of Hainan. And just a few months later, September 11th happened. U.S. attention got redirected to Middle East. And Bush actually came to Shanghai during the subsequently for APEX meeting.
Mm.
And I think from that point on, there was a sort of understanding was established between the higher up between in China and US that they need to work in a more cooperative relationship,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
the U.S. strategic focus has shifted to Middle East, and they wanted to have a more friendly relationship with China. So for the next 10 years, from I say 2001 to up to 2009, to early part of Obama term, U.S. and China had a good, I would say, good 10 years of relationship. And there was even, Obama even promoted the so-called strategic partnership with China.
Hmm.
Now it seems like so ancient history, but that was, I think this today could be seen as analogous to
Hmm.
that pivotal point in 2001. This like U.S. is overstretched.
Hmm.
As much as this U.S. empire wants to be the global hegemon, it can't. So it has to reach some sort of, even if temporary, accommodation with China, which
Hmm.
is encouraging. I mean, let's remember, it's not the China that's pushing for U.S. China confrontation.
Hmm. Hmm.
China has always wanted to do business, including with United States. At the end of the day, the business China is business.
Hmm. Hmm.
I don't know what the business of U.S. government is at this point, but so any kind of thought in this relationship, I think, is positive.
Well, it looks to me that there's a lot of talking going on, and things are friendlier in terms of constant diplomacy, and we have military to military communication again since Pelosi's visit to Taiwan province. But we also have uh, not a lot changing in terms of like the tariff war or sanctioning of individuals and companies. So even though the United States is talking a lot with China, and I think just before Xi went to San Francisco, there was like a joint declaration for tripling the amount of global solar power in the entire world, and probably really more for COP28, which is coming up. But the United States hasn't taken a lot of concrete actions to diffuse any of the real trade tensions with China. It's more like, hey, let's be friendly. But in the past, a lot of analysts, including myself and you, have said the United States, we need to see what they're going to do. We need to see, are they going to take concrete actions to back up what they're saying? But what the United States seems to have done is just gone on a spree of diplomacy and been very friendly with China, but it still hasn't taken a lot of concrete action. Are there steps that the United States should take to show that it is these are meaningful developments? And I guess my real question is this: if the United States doesn't take steps to diffuse the trade war, should China be buying more treasuries from Yellen next year? Or should that be a prerequisite for China looking upon U.S. treasuries more favorably in 2024?
So that's, again, I was not privy to the private conversation that happened in the back room. But what we have seen right now is basically a succession of hostility, right? A ceasefire. It's not a rolling back. It's not a this is not quite the Nixon visit China moment. Right? This is just like, hey, let's call it armistice. Like the U.S. is not putting on more sanctions on China at the moment, but it's not rolling back the old sanctions either. It's just kind of retching down of the rhetoric. And well, yeah, we have to see. We have to see where that leads us. Well, but it's positive in the sense that the U.S.-China relationship is not deteriorating even further. Because just a couple months ago, it seems there's no floor to the U.S.-China relationship. It was a free fall. So right now, it's like we have arrested the free falling phase, but it's not going to. It hasn't really like rising significantly back up yet. But the fact that it stopped free fall, it's still a positive development. So we have to start from where we were just a few months back, and I mean from there maybe they're doing easy stuff right now. They're doing stuff like increasing people-to-people exchange, restoring the by restoring the airline, for example, air travel. Because when I booked a ticket to fly to Beijing in mid-October, I couldn't get a direct flight. I could not. I had to fly from New York to Hong Kong and then back from Hong Kong to Beijing. And that this is because there was a drastic cut down of the U.S.-China flight due to COVID, which never really recovered post-COVID. So this is something they're working on to restore, to increasing flight, increasing people-to-people exchange. And China is doing its part. Like there's some encouraging sign. At first, they did the 6 days transit visa, where you don't need to visa as long as you can prove you're traveling outside of China at the end of 6 days. So you can basically visit China, say Shanghai, visa free, provided you have a ticket out of Shanghai after 6 days. And now they're rolling out the 15 days free visa for European countries plus Malaysia. I'm hoping they do that for United States, right? I mean, but maybe they're just experimenting, see how that goes, and maybe they're doing that rolling out in phases. I'm really hoping they roll out that to Indonesia, because they gave the 15 days to Malaysia already. Indonesia is the next step. So we'll see.
You raised a lot of interesting questions. So in terms of people-to-people exchanges, Xi mentioned that he wants to increase 50,000 U.S. students studying in China over the next 5 years. And what do you think about that? Because I'm in a private group, firstly, and some people were really distraught by that. I was really surprised, because I thought this is a fantastic development. What we need is more Americans to come to China, in my assessment, so they can say to the media, that's not true, because there's a lot of stuff in U.S. media that's inaccurate about China. But the pushback I got in some of my private WeChat groups was, why aren't these opportunities going to developing nations, to African nations, to South Asian nations, to Middle Eastern nations, to South American nations, where they really do need access to high quality higher education, and coming to China would be a wonderful influence on those. So what is your take? What is your take
I
on
don't
that?
think this is a zero-sum situation. China is doing both. China is, I mean, there are more students from the global South that's coming to study in China today, and I think one of the actually the biggest win is because prior there because of COVID restrictions, a lot of students wouldn't be able to come to resume their studies in China. So that the biggest hurdle actually has been removed, and China is providing scholarship for people in Latin America, in Africa, in Southeast Asia to come. You know, I know a lot of Indonesian students are now going to China to study. So it's not like if they open up for 50,000 American students, and that there's no more spot left for,
Right.
for the rest of the world. That's not true. So China always pursued the multi-pronged approach, right? I mean, what Chinese engagement with the United States does not preclude its engagement with the global South. That China is always engaged with global South, regardless its relationship with the United States. And I agree with you. You know, any kind of opening people to people exchange is good. I mean, most of the Americans don't have a passport. You know, that this is why they believe blindly whatever their mainstream media tells them, because they've never been to China. The only thing, ideas they have about China is whatever they read in the newspapers or the internet, which 90% it just crap. And so I think I think seeing is believing, and getting more Americans to actually experience in China would change a lot of minds.
Yeah, I think 50,000 might not be enough. I think we should see a lot more. I'm hoping that this is just one kind of exchange program, because even before this program started, right now, like, Americans can access, individual universities and apply to come to China. So I'm hoping this is 50,000 in addition to any individual US students who are already thinking about applying. I mean, Ben Norton, economist, he's now in Beijing studying at a university here. In terms of, I've been watching your show, and I watched you have some very interesting shows, because you actually invite people on with whom you have almost nothing in common, where you disagree with them enormously. And you had a gentleman named Aslan. I don't want to go into that in great detail, but it was a fantastic show, by the way. And not only I watched that, several of my coworkers watched that episode as well, and were just like thrilled with how you handled that. But I saw that you did a show with 3 Chinese Americans, which I thought was a fantastic show, because my show, The Bridge, we're trying to help people in the US understand China, people in China understand the US, and all 3 of these young men that you interviewed were Chinese Americans who didn't really know much about China, except that they had moved to China and had their own personal firsthand experience. Is that a kind of show that you might be doing in the future? Because in terms of, as an American who, as a white American, I didn't know anything about China before I moved here. I knew that there was a place called Beijing, and that there was fried rice, like nothing, stereotypes. And coming over here was profoundly life-changing for me, 11, 12 years ago. I think that that episode that you did was outstanding in terms of, like, it really opened a lot of conversations about perceptions people might have about what life in China is really like. Because even though these people were, second or third generation Chinese people, their understanding of China was almost as, empty, I would say, as my own, until they came over and had firsthand experiences, and it was completely different from what they were going to think. Is that something that you might be doing in the future?
Well, I mean, definitely, because my whole point of my podcast is I try to do what you do, Jason. I try to build bridges, and to show people the real China, the China I experienced, the China I grew up with, not the China that's reported in New York
Yeah.
Times, which is seen as bizarro world. So this is definitely something I have always been interested in doing, just to show China as is, not to serve some kind of political purpose or propaganda purpose.
You Silk and Steel, when I was first introduced to your podcast, it's also really in-depth histories about China, because most people don't know, most people outside of China don't know much Chinese history. So is what you also do analysis of Chinese history and then analogies with kind of contemporary Chinese political events. Would you say that that's how your podcast started, as like kind of like a survey of Chinese history?
Well, history is my passion. I'm always I can talk about history all day. The geopolitics part, that's just kind of because I can't stand all these mainstream disinformation on China anymore. I feel like I need to speak up. But China is always my original passion, and for a lot of Chinese people as well, like the history is kind of deeply embedded in the Chinese culture. There's a lot of cultural reference to China's own history. So to really understand China, you kind of have to understand the history, where it come from. And so this is, I wanted to flesh out China, the whole picture of China, as much as possible to my audience, to help them understand the past, which will help them to understand the present.
Yeah, I would say it's surprising to me how much history there is in China. Like I have a co-host named Bebe, and sometimes she'll say, "Yeah, I don't really know anything about that, but I just know this poem," and then she'll quote a poem perfectly accurate and then translate to me what it means about a historical period. I'm like, what are you talking? You don't know about Chinese history. Like I could not quote Shakespeare all of a sudden and just start like telling you about the context in Europe when this was written. Like I think it's remarkable how much poetry, by the way, is memorized, and all of this poetry that children memorize from 5 to 10, 12 years old is all related to different historical ideas and cultural ideas. I think it's actually it makes me want to go study Shakespeare and Chinese history, because I feel so ignorant sometimes, based, just like regular Chinese people who think that they don't know much about history, completely, much more educated about Chinese history than I am about Western history or U.S. history. I wanted to talk about military to military talks a little bit, because that is something that is concerning. The U.S. and Canada, they oftentimes fly their sorties right next to Chinese airspace with reporters who are saying, "Oh my gosh, we're only just right next to China, and that they're escorting us. How dare they?" So, like, is military to military exchanges between the United States and China, is this something that might potentially diffuse tensions in the Pacific?
I think the idea of military to military exchange is so there are no miscalculations on either side about the other side's intentions. Maybe I imagine the U.S. admiral will say something like, "Okay, look, we're just doing this, but we're just doing it's just a posture. We're doing this for show, to show our sponsors, show our quote unquote allies in East Asia, but we don't really mean to start a war." I think that's what really it's meant for. It's meant for a clear communication channel, means there's no miscalculation about each other's intentions. I don't expect that US will back off, say, on its surveillance flight. That has been going on since 2001, since the Hainan spy plane incident. The only difference now is they have to fly the reporters, and so they can put out the video on CNN and on Wall Street Journal and say, "Oh my God, the Chinese fly so close to us in South China Sea."
They fly 4,000 miles away, 5,000 miles away off the coast of China, and then they feign surprise when, like, they're 12 miles from the Chinese coast, and China's like, sends a fighter up to just escort them as they're traveling. It shouldn't be surprising when Russia flies close to Alaska, the U.S. sends sorties to escort them across the area to make sure that they're not crossing into U.S. territory. This is a common practice. It's very frustrating for me. I find this absolutely bizarre. I want to get a different take from you. COP28 is coming up, and I guess 70,000 people are descending on UAE, Dubai, for this meeting. Is this going to be another opportunity for meetings on the side between China and the U.S.? Is this going to be about environmentalism, or are there opportunities for other diplomatic efforts there?
Well, I think anytime when top U.S.-China leader present, there's always opportunity for further diplomacy, and climate change happened to be one of those low-hanging fruit that U.S. and China can cooperate on, right? And it's because China is the world leader in the producer of solar batteries, of solar energy, wind power, etc., wind turbines, solar batteries. They're all produced by China. So U.S. have to work with China if Biden is serious about fighting the global climate change. And this is something that they can work on without getting without even touching the other stuff like the tech sanctions and stuff like that, right? So this is, I think this is definitely a big opportunity to kind of build upon whatever consensus they had back in San Francisco.
Well, you mentioned the Bali talks between Xi and Biden, and you were saying on Li Jingjing's show that you hope that the meeting in San Francisco meant that the Bali consensus was carried forward. Could you tell us a little bit about maybe some of the things that China and the U.S. can or should or have agreed to cooperate on, and maybe give us a little bit of hope?
Well, one of the things that's coming out of this meeting is U.S. reaffirm its one China principle, right? Which means U.S. is not seeking to promote Taiwan independence. That's a big issue for Beijing, and so this is a U.S. may say, yeah, we may sell them weapons, but really that's for our military industrial complex profit. We're not really trying to push for Taiwan independence. Whether China buy that is a different matter. But I mean, it's the sometimes the words itself is important, and it's for U.S. to verbalize that they do not support Taiwan independence. That is important for China, and China reiterate that they're not, contrary to U.S. own projection, China is not going after that global hegemon status that U.S. currently holds. China has no intention to compete with United States to be the sole global hegemon around the world. That's not what China is about. China has no interest in the role of the global policeman. So that's the existential fear among the U.S. establishment, is all that they're being eclipsed by China. Oh my God, it's going to be the China-dominated world, right? And China's like, no, that's just in your imagination. We're just here to trade, right? But what China wants is like U.S. saying, hey, look, we don't support Taiwan independence. I think those are the core issues that the both sides care about, and the more they articulate, their own positions, and I think that will clear some misunderstanding. And hopefully to build on that basis of that understanding.
You mentioned the low-hanging fruit of cooperation in the environment, and it does seem to me that this is something that is less controversial than a lot of other global issues. However, with the trade war still going on and some of the sanctions still in place, isn't it really challenging for U.S. businesses to import? Because right now, solar and wind are manufactured in China at the lowest price point in the world. So if you're like, I don't know, South Africa, you are in fact importing Chinese solar. And the reason is it's cost effective to do so. It's the highest quality and it's the most affordable. But for the United States, currently they're not able to import a lot of this technology. However, the United States still does need to clean up its energy grid. The United States may have some solar, it has some hydro, it has some wind. However, I think Canada, Australia, the United States, they have the highest per capita fossil fuel emissions of any countries in the world. So is it going to potentially be possible for, let's say, California to import Chinese solar to clean up its power grid? Do you think that COP28 might be a good opportunity for the United States to recognize that it just makes more sense to import Chinese technology? Or is the United States going to continue to throw up trade walls because they want to manufacture it themselves? What do you think?
Well, I think we are going to see some baby steps. Like we already have the news that China's BYD is building school bus for the United States, a EV school bus. So that's a plus. I don't think we're going to see necessarily some ground shaking breakthroughs, but step by step, the cooperation and the trust have to be built over time. And I think any baby step taken is still an encouraging sign.
Okay, I want to return back to Yellen for a moment. I was talking with some of my colleagues here in China, and they mentioned that in 2008, 2009, China basically rescued the US by, during the economic dip, buying tons and tons of US treasuries, basically bailing out the US economy and the global economy by basically rescuing the United States, rescuing the dollar, rescuing the global economic order, which was kind of necessary at that point because the United States really was the pinnacle of economic growth. But I also noticed, and you mentioned this earlier, 2009, 2010, 2011, things started to change, and the United States did not continue to treat China with the same respect that it was owed. One of the examples is Obama's pivot to the Pacific, where they said they were going to try to spread half of their Navy into the Pacific, basically to contain China. So given that that is a precedent in Sino-US relations, and it does look like Yellen wants China to invest more in treasuries next year after, the last 10 years of slowly removing some treasuries as a part of China's global investments. If China does buy a whole bunch of US treasuries, does that mean that the US is going to suddenly stop this overture of friendly diplomacy? What do you think?
Well, I think China's strategy is always hope for the best and prepare for the worst. And I mean, China understands this U.S. history of its own interaction with China, including what happened in the immediate aftermath of 2008. Now, there's a couple crucial differences between now and 2008. 2008, China went on a spending spree on its own domestic infrastructure spending. There was China spent $4 trillion that helped China to build out the high-speed rail, all the amazing roads and bridges, airports, etc. But now China is built out, and also right now China is not in the same position itself back in 2008 to do another spending spree, because China is dealing with economic transition away from the real estate focus investment to growth driven by more high tech sector, more productive sector of the economy. So we are not likely to see another big spending spree by Chinese central government. So that's one thing. And the second thing is China will continue to buy treasury like they have always done, because US dollar is still the world's reserve currency. And currently US dollar is actually very strong. But I expect China will continue to cut proportionally the amount of treasury they purchase, because they also realize, like the US dollar is a sinking boat. The world trend is now is de-dollarization. And China would definitely get more bang for its buck by investing in infrastructures in the global south through its Belt and Road Initiative. That's a whole idea of Belt and Road Initiative, is rather than have all these paper IOUs that's being controlled ultimately by US central bank. They see what US did to Russia during the Russian sanction, when they can just froze all the Russian assets.
Yeah.
Now China is taking all these dollar reserves, the foreign currency reserve it has. It's investing globally to build up ports, infrastructure, so that will facilitate more trade. And China now is the world's largest trading nation, so it obviously benefit China, but it also benefit the world. So that trend will continue. The de-dollarization trend will continue. China will not abruptly cut off any purchase of U.S. Treasury. That will still continue, but I expect the trend of China reducing its treasury holding will continue forward. That's my take.
Well, I'm going to be really interested in the next Yellen visit now, because I was thinking that Yellen was just going to maybe get China to buy more U.S. treasuries, but now I'm not sure. Recently, Saudi Arabia and China have agreed for their banks to hold each other's currency. So there is a petro yuan emerging instead of a petrodollar. However, the dollar remains really strong in spite of the fact that there have been trends in de-dollarization around the world. The dollar continues to maintain its strength. Do you think that there will be more diversified use of various currencies in the future, and the dollar will take a smaller place in global trade? Or is this a temporary trend? What do you think?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the de-dollarization right now is to move away from use of dollar in the global trade. I think the dollar status of world reserve currency will remain unchanged for the time being, for foreseeable future. But as a trade currency, dollar will be used less and less, because, as you mentioned, plenty of right now, China is a factory of the world. There's no reason for China and Saudi Arabia to trade in dollars when Saudi Arabia is the largest, oil exporter to China. China exports its manufactured goods to Saudi Arabia. There's no reason that trade should be conducted in dollar. We'll see more and more of these local currency transactions outside of using the US dollars going on forward. I mean, right now the dollar is strong is really because US have destroyed EU. I mean, the whole Russian sanction thing is really, that it's destroying the German industry. They got cut off on one of their best source for cheap energy, and now the German industrialists are decamping from Germany and moving their factory to the United States, where natural gas is cheaper. So there's that. But I mean, I don't see that can continue indefinitely. I mean, Europe can only be degraded so far, and so US, I think the broad trend of de-dollarization will continue. You will not happen overnight. The US currently, China, it's mostly because China has no interest right now to see yuan replace US dollar as a world's reserve currency. If Xi Jinping want that to happen, it would happen already, because because of the strength of China's manufacturing economy. But the fact is that to be world's reserve currency, that means you will have to generate a large trade deficit with the rest of the world. And I don't think that's a road that China is prepared to take. So this is why US dollar will continue to be the world's trade currency, because reserve currency, because that for now still benefits China. But as a trading currency, you will be less and less relevant because country will just conduct, like you said, use their local currency.
Last question.
Yeah.
We have seen, at least at the surface level, communication improve between the U.S. and China. Is that going to, given the United States is in two conflicts, really, around, and actually way more than that, if we're looking at all the small little conflicts the United States is involved in Africa and elsewhere, is it likely that the United States and China are going to have this current positive momentum moving forward in the midterm, the next few years? What do you think? What is your opinion?
Well, we're gonna have to see how the election.
Can you predict the future? We won't hold you to it.
I mean, U.S. election, right? That's coming up, and
yeah,
you're gonna have to see, what the future holds in the second Trump presidency. Let's see. Who knows? Like Trump is a wild card. You never know. And right now, the way Biden is, doing to destroying its Democratic supporter base, there's a real likely possibility now that Democrats might lose, and Trump is going to be the next president. And so if Trump is president, all bets are off. He's a wild card. We don't really know.
No one can predict him. Yeah.
Exactly. This is one reason China has kind of distanced itself from the Biden administration, because who knows if this guy is still going to be in power a couple of years from now, right? I mean, but it's still encouraging. They're talking right now. As for whether what kind of trajectory U.S.-China relation will take in the next year past the U.S. election, who knows? Like you said, you can't predict the future.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, Carl. We were meant to have this interview tomorrow, but I misscheduled it. So thank you so much for being amenable to moving it to today. And have a wonderful day. I'm sure it's a beautiful day in Bali. You're at, in one of the most beautiful places in the world. So I'm sure you will have a lovely day. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jason.